This guide covers all the actions Dawntrail's Machinist learns from level 30 to 100, in order. We go over how each action is meant to be used and recommend ways to use it when relevant. We start with a tutorial on how to play Machinist at level 30, and then as we work our way to level 100, we summarize the attack rotation at level 50, and summarize changes in that at level 60, 70, 80, and 90. In the final summary at level 100, we outline an optimized opener and explain how it leads into the general rotation alongside 2-minute burst considerations. We also touch on the stat priorities of the Machinist. Now then, let's start with your 1-2-3 combo: Split Shot, Slug Shot, and Clean Shot. All three generate heat gauge, which we'll get back to in a bit. Clean Shot is particularly important as, at this level, it also serves as your hardest hitting attack. When nothing else takes priority, you want to make sure to go through this 1-2-3 combo for your weapon skills. With the exception of Spread Shot, none of your other weapon skills will cancel this 1-2-3 combo, and combos last up to 30 seconds, so you can safely derail to focus on other, more important actions for a while. Speaking of Spread Shot, this is your area of effect, or AoE for short, option. Spread Shot is superior to your 1-2-3 combo on 2 or more targets, and should simply be spammed as much as you can. Take note that the attack is a cone in front of you, so make sure to hit as many enemies as possible with it. Next, Hot Shot is a weapon skill on a cooldown of 40 seconds by default, but is affected by skill speed, so it might be useful to simply take note that its cooldown will always be equal to 16 times the recast time of your other weapon skills. The global cooldown, as it is commonly called. Hot Shot should be used on cooldown on a single target, and at this level, entirely skipped on 2 or more targets. Hot Shot's damage is higher than the average potency of your 1-2-3 combo, but strictly lower than Clean Shot. Now, let's talk about the heat gauge. Whenever you use certain actions, namely your 1-2-3 combo and Spread Shot, you generate 5 heat gauge, up to a cap of 100. When you have 50 heat gauge, you can use the ability Hypercharge, which boosts the potency of your single target weapon skills by 20. Not 20%, just a flat 20. Hypercharge covers up to 5 weapon skills, but at this level, you're only able to feasibly fit 4, unless you happen to have an unreasonably high amount of skill speed. As Hypercharge only boosts single target potencies, heat gauge does nothing for you on AoE. I recommend using Hypercharge whenever you can fit 4 weapon skills and have the heat gauge to use it, although I also recommend trying to sit on 50 heat gauge to combine with another specific ability in your arsenal. Speaking of which, let's take a look at your other abilities. Remember, abilities can be used between weapon skills. I have a video that explains this in more detail. Reassemble guarantees that your next weapon skill is a critical direct hit, which equates to at least 75% more damage. You should use Reassemble leading up to Clean Shot, as it is your strongest weapon skill. If you can make sure this also overlaps with Hypercharge, that will make Clean Shot even stronger. As such, try to save heat gauge to use alongside Reassembled Clean Shot. On the other hand, don't save Reassemble for Hypercharge. With 2 or more targets, you should use Reassemble on Spread Shot instead. Additionally, Gauss Round is another ability that simply does some damage to a single target. You should weave these between weapon skills whenever they are available. Note that you can hold 2 uses of Gauss Round at any one time, so as long as you use them regularly, you don't have to stress about using them instantly. As the ranged physical role, you also have access to certain role actions. Let's go over the important ones. While moving around in a dungeon or the open world, Peloton allows you and your party to move faster. Always make sure to use this when not in combat. Head Graze allows you to interrupt interruptible actions, which are indicated by a blinking and pulsing red cast bar. Arm's Length prevents you from being pushed by most actions. Take note, you learn this action at level 32, so you don't have it quite yet. Second Wind is nice for healing yourself when you take a lot of damage. Consider saving Second Wind if the damage was taken by the entire party, as the healer will probably need to cast a party-wide heal anyway. You also have Foot and Leg Graze. However, these actions are rarely ever very useful out of niche circumstances. Now, before moving on to new actions, let's briefly cover positioning. As a ranged physical damage dealer job, the Machinist has both great range and great mobility. Despite this, you should try to stick close to your group. In essence, if you have no good reason to stand far away from your target, it is better to get closer to your group, as it will make it easier for your healer to heal you, for instance. With all that out of the way, let's finally talk about your level up actions. At level 35, you learn the weapon skill Heat Blast. This action does a couple of things. First, you can only use it when Hypercharge is active. Second, its recast timer is only 1.5 seconds rather than 2.5, and this is unaffected by skill speed, unlike normal weapon skills. It also reduces the cooldown of Gauss round by 15 seconds whenever you use it. Due to this shorter recast timer, it is very easy to fit 5 of them in Hypercharge, and should be the only weapon skill you use during Hypercharge windows now. Take note that Heat Blast also benefits from the 20 bonus potency from Hypercharge. As Heat Blast has such a short recast time, you should at most weave 1 ability between each cast, and as it reduces the cooldown of Gauss round so aggressively, it is highly recommended to make space to use Gauss round between Heat Blasts. And try to make sure to have spent all of your Gauss rounds before using Hypercharge. As you can hold up to 100 heat gauge, I recommend planning your Hypercharge uses so it does not force you to delay other higher priority actions that can't wait as easily, like using Hot Shot on cooldown or using Reassembled Clean Shot, which, by the way, you should now use without Hypercharge. Finally, Heat Blast is better than Spread Shot on up to 3 targets due to a combination of its potency, short recast timer, and the cooldown reduction of Gauss round. At level 40, you learn the abilities Rook Autoturret and Rook Overdrive, and unlock the battery gauge. Let's focus on the battery gauge first. Clean Shot generates 10 battery gauge, while Hot Shot generates 20 battery gauge, up to a cap of 100. The Rook Autoturret ability spends, at minimum, 50 battery gauge, but up to 100 battery gauge when used. This spawns a turret that shoots your enemies for you until it runs out of battery, after which it uses Rook Overload for a heavy finisher. Rook Overdrive can force the turret to use Overload early, but this only means you get fewer shots in, so this should only be used at all if you know what you're doing. If you know the boss is going to become invulnerable or disappear, for instance. The turret always shoots 5 shots in total, and adding extra battery gauge increases the potency of the shots and the final overload. A 50 battery gauge turret will do a combined 335 potency, with a 100 battery gauge turret doing 695 potency, slightly more than twice as much. The most important factor when choosing when to use Rook Autoturret is using it at a convenient time where you know the full value of its attacks will be spent, or when allies give you damage increasing buffs, which your turret will also benefit from. The fact that Spread Shot produces no battery gauge does not change anything in its usefulness. However, if you're about to use Spread Shot while the next step in your combo sequence is specifically Clean Shot, it is worth using Clean Shot on 2 targets specifically. Hot Shot is also worth using on 2 targets due to the converted potency of Rook Autoturret. At level 45, you learn the abilities Wildfire and Detonator. Wildfire is a 2-minute cooldown that applies an effect to your target that tracks your weapon skills on the enemy for the next 10 seconds. For every weapon skill you hit the target with in the duration, Wildfire will explode for 100 potency worth of damage. Wildfire explicitly caps out at 6 weapon skills, however, you can only feasibly fit 1 regular weapon skill and 5 heat blasts in the 10-second window anyway, so this is not that important. To do this, cast Wildfire as late in your recast time as you can without delaying your next weapon skill. This is commonly called late weaving, and then cast a regular weapon skill followed by Hypercharge and 5 heat blasts. Alternatively, you can weave Hypercharge and Wildfire together, use 5 heat blasts and finish with a regular weapon skill. You should try to keep close to 50 heat gauge whenever Wildfire is about to be ready to make sure it does not get delayed, as it is quite potent. If using Wildfire on cooldown will require you to use Hypercharge overlapping with Hot Shot or a reassembled Clean Shot, then I recommend using those options first. Prioritize Hot Shot first, then reassembled Clean Shot, and then Wildfire and Hypercharge. When you use Wildfire, the button turns into Detonator, which, like Rook Overdrive, simply allows you to force it to explode early. You should only use this if you know why you're using it. At level 50, you learn the ability Ricochet, which is an almost identical ability to Gauss round. It just also has an AoE component attached to it. These two actions do not share cooldown, so you should make sure to weave both between your other attacks. Take note that Heat Blast will also reduce the cooldown of Ricochet on every use, so during Hypercharge windows, you should alternate weaving Gauss round and Ricochet to make sure none of the cooldown reduction goes to waste, or at least as little as possible. To summarize at level 50, let's cover an actual boss fight opener and rotation. Start with Hot Shot, weaving Gauss round and Ricochet, then Split Shot, again weaving Gauss round and Ricochet, Slug Shot, weaving Reassemble, and then Clean Shot. Use 2 full 1-2-3 combos more, and then weave both Rook Autoturret and Wildfire. Split Shot, weave Hypercharge, and use 5 Heat Blasts, making sure to alternate weaving Gauss round and Ricochet. You can only weave 1 for each Heat Blast. Due to how you can't guarantee that you enter a fight with enough gauge for Rook Autoturret or Hypercharge, Machinist has this somewhat awkwardly long combo sequence before the actions that depend on these gauges take off. If you enter a fight with enough gauge to use Hypercharge, you should weave Reassemble, then Wildfire, and then weave Hypercharge after the first Clean Shot. The key things to watch for throughout a fight is to make sure Hot Shot is always used on cooldown, and that Reassemble is used alongside Clean Shot as close to it being available as possible. Similarly, saving Heat Gauge to use Wildfire as soon as possible correctly is also important. Should any of these 3 requirements overlap, I recommend using Hot Shot first, then Reassemble, and then Wildfire. Beyond this, you just need to find opportunities to use Rook Autoturret where it makes sense, and spending Heat Gauge on extra Hypercharges where it does not overlap with any of your other priorities. Also, make sure to use Gauss round and Ricochet whenever they are available. With that, let's continue on past level 50. At level 52, you learn the weapon skill Auto Crossbow, which functions as an AoE alternative to Heat Blast. Auto Crossbow beats Heat Blast on 3 or more targets, however, Heat Blast is still superior on 2 targets due to the combination of its potency and cooldown reduction. Auto Crossbow also allows you to effectively make use of Wildfire on AoE, so this should be considered so Wildfire does not simply sit ready for minutes at a time. At level 54, Split Shot is permanently upgraded to Heated Split Shot. This does not change your rotation. At level 56, you learn the ability Tactician, which is a raid-wide defensive cooldown that you should use when anticipating large AoE damage from bosses. You can also use it on large AoE pulls to help blunt the damage for your tank if you think it will help them. At level 58, you learn the weapon skill Drill, which does a massive amount of damage on a 20-second cooldown. It is commonly referred to as one of the tool cooldowns. Like Hot Shot, this action's cooldown is affected by skill speed and will always be equal to 8 GCDs. From now on, you should use Reassemble on Drill on up to 4 targets, and Drill is also worth using in general on up to 4 targets. On 5 or more targets, you should skip it in favor of just spamming Spread Shot. It is very important that you use Drill on cooldown just like Hot Shot, and as Drill comes up every 8th GCD, it is worth highlighting that the 5 Heat Blasts from Hypercharge takes the equivalent of about 3 GCDs to perform, so make sure these do not overlap. If the cooldown of Drill is less than 8 seconds, you should try to delay Hypercharge to make room for Drill first. The same idea applies for Hot Shot of course, with Drill taking priority over Hot Shot. At level 60, Slug Shot is permanently upgraded to Heated Slug Shot, which does slightly more damage than Clean Shot. However, this does not change your rotation. Since level 50, you have added Auto Crossbow as an AoE heat spender for 3 or more targets, Tactician as a raid cooldown, and Drill as a heavy hitter to your rotation. Drill in particular affects your opener. Start a fight by preemptively using Reassemble, and then open with Drill, weaving Gauss round and Ricochet. Then Hot Shot, weaving another set of Gauss round and Ricochet. Then you simply do 1-2-3 combos using Drill as it comes up until you can afford a Hypercharge window. When this is the case, weave Wildfire before the GCD and Hypercharge after, followed by 5 Heat Blasts. It is more important that Drill and Hot Shot come out on time than Hypercharge, even with Wildfire. And should Drill and Hot Shot overlap, then Drill takes priority. At level 62, you learn the ability Dismantle, which tosses your trusty Wrencherang at your target, reducing the damage they do by 10% for 10 seconds on a 2-minute cooldown. In a boss fight, you can use this action in any situation you would use Tactician, so I recommend in most cases using them for separate occasions to blunt the damage of as many actions as possible. Stacking them only reduces the value of both of them, as Dismantle only reduces the damage of a single target, while Tactician reduces the damage your party takes. Tactician is more widely useful, and so you should prioritize using Dismantle first in situations where either option could do it. At level 64, Clean Shot is permanently upgraded to Heated Clean Shot, which actually does affect your rotation, as this makes your 1-2-3 combo superior to Spread Shot on 2 targets. Due to the battery gauge Clean Shot grants, combined with the average potency of the combo and Spread Shot being so close to each other, meaning that Spread Shot should be used on 3 or more targets instead. At level 66, you learn the ability Barrel Stabilizer, which gives you the Hypercharged buff for 30 seconds. This buff makes your next Hypercharge free. Barrel Stabilizer has a 2-minute cooldown, perfectly coinciding with Wildfire. This means that you essentially no longer need to stockpile Heat Gauge for Wildfire, as long as you keep these 2 cooldowns within reasonable proximity to each other. This also means you can start a fight with Reassemble Drill, Gauss Round Ricochet, Hotshot, Barrel Stabilizer, Wildfire, Split Shot, Gauss Round Hypercharge, and then go to town with Heat Blasts, compressing your rotation significantly. As Barrel Stabilizer gives you 30 seconds to spend the Hypercharge, you can, for the most part, safely use it on cooldown and just look for an opportunity to spend it. At level 68, Heat Blast permanently upgrades to Blazing Shot, increasing its potency slightly. This means that Blazing Shot, combined with Ricochet and Gauss Round, beats Auto Crossbow on up to 3 targets. Auto Crossbow is still superior on 4 or more targets. Blazing Shot also makes it, combined with Gauss Round and Ricochet, your strongest attack in terms of potency per second on a single target. However, this doesn't really change anything, since you should still use the other cooldowns exactly on time, but it is worth knowing. At level 70, you learn the channeled ability Flamethrower, which does a decent amount of AoE damage every second it is channeled. Be aware that any movement, including turning, cancels Flamethrower, and the area of effect is deceivingly short, so while Flamethrower does slightly more damage than both Spread Shot and Auto Crossbow per second, it is more likely to not hit all targets, and as such, you may find it easier to simply not use Flamethrower at all. You can use Flamethrower for a gimmick on boss fights where the boss disappears temporarily to return later, or for fights where enemies spawn in, by starting Flamethrower so the enemies are hit by the first tick the moment they become targetable. Which is a small DPS gain over not doing so, as this tick can often happen before you even had a chance to press your next GCD. Since level 60, the key addition to your arsenal is Barrel Stabilizer, which compresses your opener immensely and also removes the need for stockpiling Heat Gauge for Wildfire. Blazing Shot also boosts the power of your Hypercharge window. Open with Reassemble Drill, weaving Gauss Round and Ricochet. Then use Hotshot, weaving Barrel Stabilizer and Wildfire. Split Shot, weaving Gauss Round and Hypercharge, and then go into Blazing Shots alternating Ricochet and Gauss Round. If you find it difficult to get all of the cooldown reduction value out of the Blazing Shots, you can also delay Wildfire and Hypercharge both 1 GCD to get an extra weapon skill to weave Gauss Round and Ricochet before you start. At level 72, you learn the weapon skill Bioblaster, which is an AoE alternative to Drill that shares cooldown with it too. Bioblaster beats Drill on damage on 3 or more targets. However, as Bioblaster primarily does damage over time, which Reassemble does not affect, with 3 or more targets, I recommend using Reassemble on Spread Shot. On 3 targets specifically, if any of the enemies will not live the full duration of Bioblaster, then I recommend using Reassemble on Drill. At level 74, Gauss Round and Ricochet gets an extra charge. This does not really change your rotation, but it does make it far easier to fit all of these weaves when using Hypercharge windows. Just like the advice I gave in the level 70 summary, you can choose to delay the initial Wildfire and Hypercharge an extra GCD, or even 2 to make sure you get all the Gauss Round and Ricochet charges spent if you like. At level 76, Hotshot is permanently upgraded to Air Anchor, making its potency equal to Drill's. Air Anchor is also one of the tool cooldowns. For this reason, you should open fights with Reassembled Air Anchor instead, and then use Drill second. You can use Reassemble on either Drill or Air Anchor when they come up. The important part is using Reassemble as soon as possible on one of them. I would recommend using Air Anchor on up to 5 targets, and on 3 or 4 targets, you should use Reassemble on Air Anchor over Spreadshot. Beyond 5 targets, you can skip Air Anchor if you like. On AoE pulls, consider using Air Anchor while the tank is pulling, since it doesn't scale with target count. At level 78, Wildfire's potency is boosted tremendously. This does not really change how you use it, but it does make the impact of using it right much more important. At level 80, your Rook Autoturret is permanently replaced by the Automaton Queen. This somewhat changes the damage profile of the ability, but otherwise mainly greatly increases the damage it does. The Automaton Queen will perform a roller dash, followed by 3 arm punches, and finishing with the Pile Bunker, which adds up to a total of 940 potency on 50 battery gauge, and exactly twice that on 100. The Automaton Queen takes a bit longer to perform its full damage than the Rook Autoturret as well. The key difference this makes for your rotation is that I would recommend using Air Anchor on up to 6 targets instead, due to the increased value of battery gauge. Otherwise, you should use Automaton Queen the same way you used Rook Autoturret, with the exception that there isn't really any extra value to be gained from holding to 100 unless you aim for raid buffs or something. Since level 70, you have learned Bioblaster for an improvement to your AoE damage on 3 or more targets, add an extra charge to Gauss round and Ricochet for some quality of life, as well as upgrade Wildfire's damage and replace the turret with a robot. Hotshot was also upgraded to Air Anchor, the main thing that changes your opener. Start with a reassembled Air Anchor, weaving Gauss round and Ricochet, then Drill, weaving Barrel Stabilizer and Gauss round. Do Split Shot, weaving Ricochet and Gauss round, and then Slug Shot, weaving Ricochet and Wildfire. Then Clean Shot, weaving Hypercharge, and perform Blazing Shots, weaving Gauss rounds and Ricochets. Use Air Anchor on up to 6 targets, and with specifically 3 or 4 targets, use Reassemble alongside Air Anchor, but use it on Spread Shot with 5 or more targets. At level 82, Spread Shot is permanently upgraded to Scattergun, materializing a shotgun in your pant leg out of thin air. Don't worry about it. Scattergun generates heat twice as fast as all your other options, and also does slightly more damage than Spread Shot, making it superior to your 1-2-3 combo on 2 or more targets. On 4 or more targets, Reassemble can safely be used on Scattergun as well. Take note that Scattergun does more potency than Auto Crossbow. So, if you were in the habit of using Reassemble interchangeably on these 2 actions, you should now make a point of strictly using it on Scattergun on AoE. At level 84, Reassemble becomes able to hold 2 charges, giving you a lot more freedom in when you want to use it. It also means you can use Reassemble on both Air Anchor and Drill in the opener. The potency of your 1-2-3 combos also increased by just enough that they are now superior on 2 targets again, meaning Scattergun should be used on 3 or more targets. At level 86, the Automaton Queen is upgraded with the Crowned Collider, an additional attack it uses at the end of each use, effectively adding 390 extra potency to it, twice that for full battery gauge. The only change this adds is that Air Anchor is now worth using on 7 targets just to get the gauge. At level 88, the cooldown of Tactician is reduced to 90 seconds, but this does not really change anything about how you use it. At level 90, you learn the weapon skill Chainsaw, another tool, which is an AoE attack with just as much potency as Drill on the main target. It also generates battery gauge like Air Anchor. It is on a 1-minute cooldown that is affected by skill speed, meaning that it is always available as every 24th GCD. On 2 or more targets, Reassemble should always be paired up with Chainsaw, and so you should keep a Reassemble specifically for this purpose in dungeons, or boss fights with AoE phases. Just like Drill and Air Anchor, Chainsaw should preferably be used on cooldown. Since level 80, Spread Shot upgraded to Scattergun. You gained an extra Reassemble charge, the Queen got upgraded to do more damage, and you learned Chainsaw, a tool with an AoE component. Perfect for Reassemble on AoE. The way this changes your opener is simply that you push back Wildfire 1 extra GCD and reassemble Wildfire on Chainsaw right after Clean Shot. This then allows you to use Automaton Queen and Hypercharge right after Chainsaw. At level 92, Gauss Round and Ricochet upgrade to Double Check and Checkmate, making them both do exactly 160 potency with an AoE component. This means that Blazing Shot is better than Auto Crossbow on up to 5 targets. Take note that this also means Double Check, which was Gauss Round, now has an AoE component. At level 94, Drill and Bioblaster gains an additional charge and stop scaling their cooldown with skill speed for some reason. This gives you more flexibility in when you use these, as you no longer need to use them exactly on cooldown. This also allows you to maintain the dot from Bioblaster for the majority of an AoE pull. Second Wind is also upgraded to heal you for more. Finally, the potency of your 1-2-3 combo, Scattergun and Auto Crossbow are increased. This means that Scattergun is once again better on 2 targets, and Auto Crossbow is equal to Blazing Shot on 4 targets, and better on 5 or more targets. Depending on whether you need to concentrate damage more on a single target or spread it more, you can choose freely on 4 targets. Oh, also, remember Flamethrower? Yep. Now it is only good for the weird boss spawning in gimmick, as Scattergun and Auto Crossbow average the same potency as Flamethrower, with more flexible movement and longer range. At level 96, Chainsaw is upgraded to grant you Excavator ready for 30 seconds, and turn into the Excavator tool when used. This tool hits just as hard as Chainsaw, but strikes in a circle around your target instead of in a line. It also generates battery gauge. You should use Excavator every time you use Chainsaw, but you don't have to use it immediately after Chainsaw, as long as it is used within 30 seconds. At level 98, Tactician is upgraded to reduce damage by 15% instead of 10%. This does not change how you use it. At level 100, Barrel Stabilizer is upgraded to grant you the Full Metal Machinist buff for 30 seconds, and turns into Full Metal Field when used. Full Metal Field is a weapon skill that does critical direct hit damage with an AoE component, and should be used whenever it is available. An interesting quirk about this attack is that, as it is inherently critical direct hitting, it does not consume the Reassemble buff should you have it. As it is AoE, it will also not consume Hypercharge stacks, should you have those. Interestingly, this is also the case for Chainsaw and Excavator. To round off, let's first talk about an opener, followed by general rotation, as well as how to work with the 2-minute burst. And finally, let's briefly touch on stat priorities on gear. Let's begin. Up to 5 seconds before combat starts, use Reassemble. If you intend to use a gem draft, use it 2 seconds before combat starts. Open with Air Anchor, weaving Checkmate and Double Check. Then use Drill, weaving Barrel Stabilizer. Then use Chainsaw, then Excavator, weaving Automaton Queen and Reassemble. Followed by Drill, weaving Checkmate and Wildfire. Then use Full Metal Field, weaving Double Check and Hypercharge. Then use Blazing Shots, alternating weaving Checkmate and Double Check 5 times. Then Drill, weaving Double Check and Checkmate. Heated Split Shot, weaving the one you have left, Heated Slug Shot, and then Heated Clean Shot. This then leads to the general rotation. Machinist's rotation is heavily focused on using certain cooldowns exactly when they come up, these being Air Anchor, Chainsaw, Barrel Stabilizer, and Wildfire. These 4 cooldowns heavily dictate how everything else in the rotation plays out, as you don't want to be in the middle of a Hypercharge window when any, yes, any of these cooldowns pop off cooldown if you can help it. Another thing to watch for is that your battery gauge should be as close to full as possible whenever the 2-minute burst comes up, which isn't too difficult considering you easily generate 140 battery over a 2-minute period from just Air Anchor and Chainsaw. But knowing exactly when to use Automaton Queen to make sure you're close to full without overcapping anywhere on the 2-minute burst can take some practice. Your other cooldowns that work on charges are of course also expected to be used regularly, but due to their greater flexibility, you don't have to use them immediately. Instead, you can hold Reassemble to use once per minute on a tool of your choosing. The checks can be weaved whenever it seems convenient, and can also be stockpiled a bit to use in bursts leading into a 2-minute burst. Holding 1 charge of Drill leading into the 2-minute burst can also allow you to fit 2 of them in the burst. Just make sure you don't sit on 2 charges anywhere as a result. And finally, of course, Barrel Stabilizer gives you 30 seconds to spend both of the effects it grants, so you're mostly fine to use it exactly on cooldown and then look for a convenient time to spend the effects. When you close in on the 2-minute burst time, it is a good idea to stockpile 50 heat gauge so you can use Hypercharge twice in the burst. Outside of a more coordinated group situation, the most important thing is to make sure you use your cooldowns on cooldown, and make sure you can use Wildfire followed by Hypercharge into Blazing Shots without drifting anything. For AoE adjustments, use Scattergun instead of your 1-2-3 combo on 2 or more targets. Use Auto Crossbow instead of Blazing Shot on at least 4 targets. Use Bioblaster instead of Drill on 3 or more targets. Use Reassembles on Chainsaw and Excavator on 2 or more targets. And make sure to use the checks. I recommend using Air Anchor on a big mob while the tank is still pulling, so it doesn't go off cooldown during the big AoE burst. Remember that you can also put Wildfire on the biggest mob just before you use Hypercharge. Now, let's go over the 2-minute burst in particular. Let's start with the so-called carrying combo style, as it coming with no asterisks makes it easier to incorporate into learning the job's more advanced nuances. After your opener, every third air anchor heralds your 2-minute burst, assuming it is used on cooldown. If you intend to use a gem draft, late weave it just before the air anchor. Then weave Automaton Queen and a check. Then use Drill, weaving Barrel Stabilizer and the other check. Use Chainsaw, weaving a check and Reassemble. Excavator, weaving double check and Checkmate. Full Metal Field, weaving Hypercharge and Wildfire. Then 5 Blazing Shots, weaving checks. And then 1-1-2-3 combo step, weaving a check. Drill, weaving Hypercharge into 5 more Blazing Shots and checks. The alternative combo neutral 2-minute burst, which should only be considered if you finished with clean shot just before the air anchor, instead late weaves Hypercharge before Full Metal Field, making use of the quirk that it doesn't spend Hypercharge stacks. This earlier use of Hypercharge allows you to weave Hypercharge again immediately after the 5th Blazing Shot, leading to 10 Blazing Shots in succession, finishing with Drill after all of them. Both of these 2-minute bursts are very strict in each their own way, and can get a little awkward if you have almost any skill speed at all. Finally, regarding stat priorities, take note that in nearly every single case, item level beats out optimal secondary stats. This means you should always prioritize gear with higher item level, as long as it has dexterity on it. After that, Machinist's stat priority is critical hit, then determination and direct hit, and finally skill speed. Determination and direct hit are almost identical in value, with determination being a tiny bit better. And because the stats interact with each other, given the choice, aim to balance them evenly with determination slightly higher. Having as much crit as possible is more important though. Skill speed is not very helpful to Machinists, but it is not so bad that you should toss an item that also has a lot of crit on it just because it has skill speed. Machinists do prefer minimal skill speed though. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to support me and my channel more directly, you can become a member like these wonderful people here. You can also alternatively support me through Ko-Fi, link in the description. You can also support the channel by letting the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, sharing, and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. Fun fact: Drill, Bioblaster, Air Anchor, Chainsaw, and Excavator are known as the tools because they're all shot from the same multi-purpose cannon that you materialize out of thin air for these attacks. Technically, Crossbow also uses this multi-tool, but is typically not counted amongst the other tools due to having a drastically different functionality. Next time you use these attacks, notice that each attack uses a different part of the big multi-tool.